Okay, so I've been thinking about this topic. Turn my music down here. Ever since watching this video on Pablo Torre Finds Out, which was released the other day, and I'll let you guys see that. Okay, so this video is about a story that Pablo worked on with Wired magazine, um, and it's regarding the surveillance technology being used at Madison Square Garden, which is obviously the home of the New York Knicks and the New York Rangers. And the New York Knicks and New York Rangers, as well as Madison Square Garden, are owned by a man named James Dolan, which many of you probably have heard of. He's a fairly well-known owner, known for his sort of pettiness and he's just an extra sort of billionaire. Very unlikable, petty guy. And notably, a few years ago, threw out of his arena this guy Charles Oakley, who's a Knicks legend, and for whatever reason, the security team decided that he needed to be thrown out. It was never really known why. And this was sort of one incident, very high-profile incident that I would say negatively impacted James Dolan's image in the public eye. So he's sort of just seen as this crotchety old billionaire that just throws out even the legends of his own team from his arena, just because he doesn't like. Apparently, he has a sort of a personal vendetta against Charles Oakley. Charles Oakley, I guess, has been vocal about his disdain for James Dolan and his ownership of the Knicks. So Dolan just threw him out one night. That became this story. So what this story with Pablo and the Wired and Wired magazine is about this surveillance technology that James Dolan is using at Madison Square Garden for Rangers and Knicks games. And this surveillance technology uses sort of the cutting edge facial recognition software, and there's tons of cameras, there's microphones recording everything that's said, and it is just this very dystopian, very detailed, very comprehensive facial recognition equipped surveillance system that's being used within Madison Square Garden. And some of the stuff that they're doing with this surveillance system, is just sort of like wholly inappropriate. Like, the most detailed example comes from the case of Nina Richard, that's not her real name, but she's a transgender woman who, according to Wired's investigation, was tracked by MSG security for over a period of roughly 2 years. Internal documents and lawsuits reviewed by the outlet describe an operation that went far beyond standard monitoring. An 18-page report compiled by MSG's threat management group logged Richard's movements and by the way, that's what they call this surveillance system at MSG's threat management group. Like, good lord. So they logged Richard's movements, this transgender woman's movements, in striking detail during a January 2022 Knicks games, timing her interactions, noting her location across camera feeds, and even recording her entry and exit from her restroom down to the second. Good lord. Former employees told the publication that Richard posed no discernible threat. She wasn't trying to go places she shouldn't be. This is just a very large transgender woman being a fan walking around. Jeez. Yet, according to a lawsuit filed by former security staffer Donnie Ingrassalino and cited by Wired, security chief John Eversole repeatedly singled her out, allegedly misgendering her in meetings and instructing staff to monitor her closely. So they're just being like super like dystopian, Gestapo-y, like weird security guard, just overstepping, appropriateness, using this facial recognition surveillance technology. And indeed, for a few years at least, people in New York and different advocacy groups have known about this technology and have been trying to get it stopped, or trying to get some sort of legislation, or New York lawmakers or city lawmakers, I guess, to make it illegal for him to have this comprehensive facial recognition technology. And this is look, this is 3 years ago. Advocates demand MSG stop using facial recognition. MSG facial recognition technology controversy 3 years ago. You even had this ESPN video, which was from PTI, a pretty well-known opinion show on ESPN in the evenings with Tony Kornheiser and Pablo Torre. James Dolan's use of facial recognition software needs to be stopped, says Tony Kornheiser. So, this is something that's been known for a number of years now, right? That when you go to MSG, and people in New York especially that attend Nick games, they know that he's using this. You know, this is why it's sort of crescendoed to this big story now written by Wired, because people have known about this and people talk and you know, a number of people have been thrown out of MSGs for simply saying things like "sell the team" in reference to James Dolan, or "Dolan sucks," or things like that. The microphones in the surveillance system picks that up. They use facial recognition to identify that person, and then every time they come in the arena, they know where that person is. And if they do that too many times, they basically just get ejected, sort of like you're seeing here with Charles Oakley. This is essentially what happened to him, right? So Knick fans and, you know, the larger community around Madison Square Garden in New York City that follows the Knicks, they know about this going on at Madison Square Garden. So you'd expect then for them, if they're so offended by this, to stop, for at least a decent percentage of them, to stop going to the games, right? Like, that's the one way that you can show that you actually disagree with this, the use of this technology. Don't go to the games, right? Well, if you look at MSG attendance, NBA attendance over this past season, 2026 season, well, the New York Knicks are sixth in the league, so top of the league. And that is not even that's with them having one full game less recorded in this, you know, on this list. So every other team played 41 home games. The Knicks, for some reason, I'm not sure why, only played 40, and they were still sixth in attendance with 792,000. Right. So if you gave them that extra game, I can't really make that average out, but I think they'd probably be either at the top or right there at the top. So essentially, for all intents and purposes, the Knicks are at the top of the league attendance-wise. So my point is, you don't actually care about this surveillance. At least the people attending the games. They appear to be totally fine with it. Because if you actually cared, the Knicks would not be top of the league in attendance. And so if you actually hit them where it hurts with the thing that they care about, which is their money and their sales and their profits, you will actually send a meaningful message to them. But the message that New York Knicks fans are sending James Dolan right now is, keep taking a picture of my face. I love your facial recognition technology. Take all my data. You know, remember every time I've been here, every time I go to the bathroom, because they have one among the highest attendance in the league. So the message that's being sent to James Dolan is, keep using the technology, baby. We love it. So let's look at a couple other teams. Let's go outside the Knicks. Let's go to the NFL. Think about the two NFL teams that come to mind for being the most embarrassing. There's a handful that you can grab from, but for me, the two most embarrassing teams in the NFL are the New York Jets and the Cleveland Browns. And there's a number of reasons for this, but it ultimately just boils down to sustained dysfunction and failure, right, over the course of decades. It's like almost unfathomable that how bad these teams have been consistently, and how just they sort of seem to just embarrass themselves season after season, whether it be some big high-profile scandal or embarrassing draft picks or just like dysfunctional owner behavior, reports coming out of the organization that there's just, you know, odd things going on, that kind of stuff, just embarrassing dysfunction, right? And again, it's reflected in their record. If we look at the last 30 years of NFL seasons, so the last 484 games since 1996, indeed the Jets and the Browns are amidst the bottom of the league. So you would expect then that they're basically playing, at this point, after 30 years of just total failure, that they're playing in front of what must be just empty stadiums, right? No one would go watch these stupid teams anymore. Why would you? They just lose every year. They lose every year, and they give you no reason to think they're actually going to get any better the next year. So it must be that the fans have just abandoned the team, right? Nope. we look at NFL attendance for 2025, Cleveland 15th, so middle of the league. You know, comparison with, you know, comparative to a lot of other franchises that are considered, you know, good franchises. Green Bay, Baltimore, you know, and Cleveland's only, you know, a percentage point or two below them in terms of attendance. They're middle of the league. The Jets, 4th in the league in attendance. 4th in the league. So, again, and you have to also consider that, I guess the Browns did have 9 home games, and the Jets had 9 as well. Some of these teams only played 8 home games, which could affect their attendance. But, no, Cleveland and the Jets both played 9 apiece, and they have middle of the pack and upper league attendance. How is that possible? How is there a single fan that still goes to Cleveland Brown games? It doesn't make any sense to me. Because what you're saying as a fan is that you don't give a shit that the team's terrible. And that the owners and the people that the owners have empowered screw everything up and consistently give you a crappy product. You are telling them, and you have told them, over 20 consistent years that we don't give a crap if this team wins or loses. We'll just keep coming at about the same rate as everyone else in the league. So if the Browns actually want to make a meaningful impact, send a real message, if Browns fans want to make a meaningful impact on their franchise, send a real message to their owners that you guys need to figure this shit out, then you can't be middle of the pack in attendance. You need to be bottom of the league, way down at the bottom, basically reflecting somewhat empty stadiums throughout the whole season. Do you think if the Browns had embarrassingly empty stadiums all season, that there wouldn't be a major shakeup, major changes, and indeed pressure from even the NFL on them to figure this thing out? None of that pressure, none of that impetus exists because they just keep filling their stadium. And the Jets are even worse. I mean, they were one of the highest performing attendance teams in the league. So it's like these fans can never expect this team to get any better or to do anything different as long as you tell these owners, yeah, we'll just keep coming. Now, obviously what I'm referring to here is essentially a boycott, right? And, you know, because what you're doing is you're essentially saying to the business, I'm not going to buy your product anymore as long as this continues. Whatever this is, whether it's their behavior or their practices or the way they've made a product, right? That's what a boycott is. And so refusing to attend the games is the same thing as a boycott. And boycotts are one of the few ways that consumers can actually send a meaningful message to these company owners, the people that are in control of these big companies that a lot of people consume products from like NFL teams. Now, one recent example of this that you can think of, one really effective example that I'm sure you can remember, was the Bud Light boycott of a few years back. I'll remind you here with this video.
Second video appeared on TikTok. A transgender influencer smiling and holding a Bud Light can with her own image on it. Just 10 days later, $27 billion of the largest American brewery's market capitalization vanished. Following that, a wave of boycotts spread across states, bars removed Bud Light signs, and thousands of workers lost their jobs. A brand that dominated for 22 years collapsed due to a seemingly harmless campaign.
Okay, so as you probably are remembering now, they had this social media campaign that involved this transgender woman. That offended these people so much, their main customer base, that these people stopped buying Bud Light altogether, like immediately. And you remember Kid Rock had the video of him like shooting his Bud Light cans with his AR. Well, they were so effective in boycotting Bud Light, like from that moment on, Bud Light to this day has not recovered from that, right? Like their image was essentially permanently marred, and their sales and their ability to function as a company was permanently marred by that decision. And that is because customers said, no, I'm not buying your stuff anymore if that's who you are, that's who you're going to be, or that's what you're going to give me. But it is an example of consumers having an impact on a company by simply making the decision to not buy that product anymore, right? So another example of this that you can probably think of is Elon Musk, right? And Elon Musk, a couple of years ago, decided to sort of hitch his wagon to Donald Trump and the MAGA party, or the MAGA political entity, right? And he was very gung-ho, wearing the red cap. He was in the Oval Office with Donald Trump. He was very heavily involved. And what happened was, those customers that were his traditional base, which were more left-leaning and more, renewable energy focused, and just a completely different crowd from that MAGA crowd, they got very offended by this. And it turned out they were a large portion of his Tesla customers, right? A lot of those people simply never bought a Tesla or decided not to, or were just so offended by Elon Musk's political affiliations that they decided they didn't like Tesla anymore, right? And indeed, over the next 2 years, Tesla's global vehicle sales declined. Not precipitously, but by meaningful percentage points. And I'm sure there's other factors as well, but I don't think it's a coincidence that those declines begin right when he makes that political affiliation with Donald Trump. And so I think that's just a prime example of how consumers, if they truly get offended enough by something, or they truly decide, that's enough for me to not want to support this, right? And they stop supporting it, they can actually make a difference and force change. Because think about it. Elon Musk, if you think about 2 years ago, how heavy-handed he was with his political affiliations, well, these days he's pulled way back from that, right? Like he's not in the Oval Office every day anymore. There's no more Doge. And I know he had a pretty big public falling out with Donald Trump, but if you just follow his X and you just follow his announcements, there's almost no politics involved in it anymore. And so I think that change in behavior from all this heavy political stuff and staunch politics in year 2024, I think the reason for that change is the decline in Tesla sales and the pressure that the consumer put on him. So a couple of things to keep an eye on as we go forward along these same lines is, one thing I'm interested in is this upcoming year, if fans make meaningful cancellations on their subscriptions to NFL Red Zone. Now, why would they do that? Well, last year was the first year that the NFL Red Zone introduced commercials. And many of you will remember, if you've ever seen NFL Red Zone, that the tagline at the beginning of Red Zone was always 7 hours of commercial-free football. Well, last year, it changed. It was 7 hours of Red Zone football. And the reason for that is they added commercials. So they can't say commercial-free anymore, obviously. Now, why were fans pissed off about this? Because the Red Zone is a paid service. You have to pay extra, right? Like on top of your cable package, on top of your streaming service, whatever you get, you have to pay extra for the Red Zone channel, right? So from the point of view of the fans, the reason that they were paying extra was because they were getting this commercial-free service. That's why I'm paying extras, to forgo the ads, right? Which is, I would say, fairly typical for a paid service, or at least has been. So last year when they introduced commercials, on top of it already being a paid service, this aggravated fans. It was, it created quite a buzz at the beginning of the season. Now, people obviously just become enamored with their teams and get so distracted by the season that the coverage around this and sort of the complaints died down, or were buried by the rest of the news that the season churns up. But I'm interested to see if maybe this issue comes up again this year, if it sort of resurfaces, or if we see any sort of mass cancellation event. Unfortunately, at least according to AI, no direct data shows NFL Red Zone subscriptions declining last season, the 2025 NFL regular season, despite the backlash from introducing ads previously promised as commercial-free, which sparked widespread fan discontent and boycott calls. So far, no evidence of those boycotts actually working. And Red Zone is $100 a year. So you are paying a pretty, a premium price for a few months of commercial-free access to Red Zone, which is not commercial-free anymore. So I think you can understand fans' discontent with that. Will they actually act on it? I guess we'll see. So far, they haven't. So the other one I want to keep an eye on is these MLB attendance numbers. So fans in the MLB are sending a clear message to these franchises and the MLB as a whole that they don't want to go to these boring early season, what they view as meaningless games, right? Especially for these horrible teams. And this article is from Fansided. And MLB is seeing a noticeable drop in fan attendance across more than half of its teams in the first 2 weeks of the season. Through the season's first 2 weeks, over half the league's 30 teams are seeing a reduced year-over-year average, ranging from the Mets to the Angels. The answer as to why isn't so simple, though it's nonetheless worth investigating and discussing. So, basically, some of these stadiums are embarrassingly empty. And it shows on TV. If the TV game happens to be at the home stadium of a team that's pretty bad or expected to be bad this season, you will notice on the broadcast how empty the stadium feels. There's a quiet to it. There's a silence. Like, you can almost hear the discussions of, like, the few fans that are in the stadium. And there's an echo, too. It's just very odd. It doesn't look good. I'm curious as to what Major League Baseball is going to do about this. Over the last 5 to 10 years, as these attendance numbers have come down, and especially as these early season weeks have been particularly embarrassing, the MLB has sort of left it to the franchises themselves to deal with it sort of individually, trying to make their parks more appealing, offering deals on the first few weeks of the season in terms of tickets so you get a better price, offering interesting food at the concession stands, weird floats and banana splits and all that kind of stuff that you see at baseball games. So the franchises themselves have tried these various things to try to bring these attendance numbers up. Unfortunately, as we're seeing, as outlined in this article, from many of these franchises, it's just continuing to plummet. So I'm wondering if you'll see the MLB as a whole, the MLB itself, try to intervene on this issue and try to figure this out and figure out if there's anything they can do. Now, you remember a few years ago, they introduced the pitch clock, which was in response to the TV ratings being poor, right? Now, the TV ratings being a large source of their revenue, that was obviously a very existential risk. And so they responded to that by introducing the pitch clock, which I think a lot of people would agree has really helped the TV product get better, and indeed that's reflected in the ratings year over year have been going up the past couple of seasons. And I think they're even better than the NBA ratings now, which is kind of crazy to think about. The MLB is more popular at least as a TV product than the NBA. It just ends up being a perfect example of this idea that the only way to actually get these huge corporations, these huge financial entities, these big businesses to do anything is to hit them where it hurts, which is in their wallets. We'll see if the MLB tries to intervene. We'll see if they take any major steps to try to, remediate this attendance issue. May end up being another good example of how consumer behavior ends up affecting change. So, if you're a Nick fan that attends MSG, if you don't like facial recognition software, stop going. Stop going to MSG. That's the only thing you can actually do to affect change. If you're a Jets fan, if you're a Browns fan, stop attending the games. Stop rewarding these billionaire families that own these teams for, just giving you crap every year. Stop rewarding them. That's the only way to send them a message. That's the only power that you really have. And if you don't do that, if you keep going to the games, don't expect anything to change.